Glenn. Thank you very much, both to Amanda and to Glenn for inviting us and for doing all the background work of organizing this event today. We are going to speak for approximately 30 minutes and then devote our additional 30 minutes to a question and answer period. So we'd like to just start by introducing ourselves a little bit more.
I'm Alexandre Barry. Oh, sorry, Marjorie. So I'm Alexandre Barry. I am a trans man using masculine pronoun. And as Glenn mentioned, and thank you, Amanda and Glenn, for the introduction. So I am an associate professor at the University of Ottawa in social work, and I am specializing in gender, trans, sexuality, and disability issues.
And I am Marjorie Silverman, a cis woman using feminine pronouns. I'm also a professor at the University of Ottawa, specializing in social gerontology and family care. So the work we are presenting today is based on an article that we co-wrote, and that was published in the academic journal Sexualities. We also have 2 other publications on related topics. If you're interested to know more after today's presentation, we can make those articles available to you. Towards the end of our presentation, we will also talk to you a little bit about the fieldwork for our research project, as Glenn mentioned. But first, we'll set the stage by telling you more about our research topic, which looks at the experiences of trans older adults with dementia and their support networks. So we believe that this underdocumented topic deserves attention based on the following observations. The first is that the Canadian population is aging. The number of trans people is growing, and there is a first cohort of trans older adults, many of whom will also be living with dementia. Trans older adults seem to have a higher risk of developing dementia based on the presence of risk factors such as depression, isolation, and substance use in trans communities. Trans older adults face widespread barriers, discrimination, and mistreatment in health and social services. And number 5, trans people have expressed that they fear to live with dementia, to forget their chosen identity, and to be mistreated by healthcare professionals. So while there is a growing literature addressing the intersections of trans and aging, there has been very little focus to date on trans and dementia. In the rare literature available, anecdotal evidence suggests that cognitive changes accompanying dementia can impact on gender identity for trans people. For example, trans people with dementia may experience gender confusion or forget they transitioned and re-identify with their sex gender assigned at birth. This leads to numerous questions regarding how we should respond towards trans people with dementia if they forget, either permanently or temporarily, their self-identified gender. Such situations can place practitioners and family members in front of dilemmas regarding external appearance, like body care, haircuts, shaving, makeup, healthcare, like continuing or discontinuing hormonal treatments, as well as social interactions, so pronoun use and names. In the literature to date, a few different ideas have been put forward regarding how practitioners should intervene in cases of potential gender confusion caused by cognitive disability. And we've categorized these ideas into 3 main paradigms. Despite certain strengths, we argue that each of these paradigms has limitations, and we have therefore developed a 4th paradigm. So after defining our main concepts, we will present critical reflections on these paradigms, concluding with the one that we have developed. So we'll begin by defining our terms.
Thank you, Marjorie. So I'll take it from here. We are using the term trans as an encompassing umbrella that includes a variety of non-conforming gender identities, such as transsexual, transgender, non-binary, agender, gender fluid people, and so on. And when we refer to trans older adults, we refer to people who are aging and who have transitioned, be it socially, hormonally, surgically, or legally earlier in their lives, as well as those who decided to transition when they were already in older adulthood. Just to make sure that everyone is on the same page, so the term cissexual and cisgender person is a non-transgender or non-transsexual person. And the term cisgenderism is a similar concept to transphobia, but it avoids the individual pathologization attached to the notion of phobia and puts the emphasis on structural violence experienced by trans communities. And the term cisnormativity is the normative dimension of the cisgenderist oppressive system. We are using as well the term dementia in a similar umbrella manner to encompass a variety of conditions that can lead to memory loss, communication, and other cognitive changes, such as Alzheimer's disease or vascular dementia. In our work, we engage with dementia through critical disability perspective, and we adopt a critical stance of the biomedical model of dementia that associates it with decline, loss of personhood, impoverishment of the self, and lack of agency. In this presentation, we also use the term cogniticism. So probably the first time you encounter this term. So this term is a term inspired by the term ableism in disability studies and aims to describe a specific form of ableism that targets cognitive abilities or disabilities in this case. Andrew King coined the terms cognonormative and cognonormativity to refer to the norms regarding cognitive abilities that marginalize people living with dementia and people with cognitive disabilities. And inspired by his concept, we coined a few years ago the term cogniticism, understood as an oppressive system that discriminates against people with cognitive disability. We will look now at a variety of different possibilities of how to intervene with trans people with dementia based on the available literature that we surveyed in our research.
So what we have categorized as the first paradigm is based on the work of authors named Marshall, Cooper, and Rudnick, who document one of the only case studies of a trans person living with dementia. The approach they articulate encourages conformity to gender binary categories that are masculine or feminine, and suggests, in the case of gender confusion, that we avoid gender markers altogether. So we have named this approach gender neutralization because it advocates degendering the trans person or avoiding gender altogether as a way of dealing with possible instances of gender fluidity. We believe this paradigm, through its suggestion of gender neutralization, when people fail, so to speak, to conform to binary categories, as well as its adherence to discourse on dementia that involves decline, loss of personhood and identity, is neither trans-affirmative nor disability positive. Marshall, Cooper, and Rudnick outline the case of Jamie, a 94-year-old trans person living with dementia, described as, quote, a patient who is no longer able to express a consistent gender preference due to moderate dementia, end quote. So they write this. The staff noted that she was confused as to whether she was male or female, asking, what am I? She frequently looked down at her breasts and asked, where did these come from? At times, she expressed a desire to dress and be addressed as a female, and at other times as male. She was able to recall that she had been living on and off as a woman since her 80s. She also recalled that she had been taking estrogen at one point in time. She stated that she would now prefer to live as a man and to be addressed as he. She indicated her preference was to wear masculine clothing, but when identifying what that would look like, she pointed to women's clothing in her closet. At night, she continued to request to wear a women's nightgown because this was more comfortable. She wished to keep the name Jamie. She stated that she wanted to be a male, and when asked to elaborate, she replied, because I should be male, and also because she felt pressure from her daughter. In this case, cognitive disability is seen as removing the trans person's agency to make decisions. Due to ableist and cogniticist assumptions, the authors claim that Jamie is confused and no longer has clear preferences. Yet, as is evident in the excerpt I just read, Jamie does have clear preferences and is able to make choices regarding name, pronouns, clothing, etc. So this case brings to light the forms of ableism and cogniticism at play in discourses on dementia, associating it with lack of agency and decision-making power. It also highlights a non-trans affirmative perspective, as Jamie is seen as confused because she does not fit into binary gender categories in a stable manner. The authors conclude that there are two main solutions for this confusion. Number one, avoid gendering Jamie by behaving with Jamie in as gender neutral a manner as possible. For example, by avoiding the use of pronouns and dressing Jamie in a gender neutral manner. Or number two, ask Jamie's power of attorney, in this case, her transphobic cisgenderist daughter, to state in which gender Jamie should live. In addition to the implicit ableism, cogniticism, and ageism inherent in the second solution by denying Jamie's agency, it seems that having an inconsistent gender identity is characterized as pathological, a confused state of mind, a position that is dismissive of non-binary identities. The first solution, which may have the appearance of being more respectful, is also problematic, as gender neutrality can be experienced as a form of violence for some trans people for whom gender identity recognition is crucial.
So we will now talk about the second paradigm. So while Marshall, Cooper, and Rudnick that we just discussed argue that gender confusion, detransition, and retransition is a possibility for trans people living with dementia, authors working within what we name the paradigm based on a trans-affirmative stable approach stipulate that trans people living with dementia are not confused at all about their gender. However, two elements could lead trans people living with dementia to disidentify with their chosen gender. The first one is external cisgenderist pressures, and the second one is cognitive decline. Social, institutional, medical, and family pressures exerted on vulnerable populations, such as people living with dementia, could push them to conform to their sex and gender assigned at birth. We qualify this approach as trans-affirmative because it valorizes the historical chosen gender identity of the trans person and argues for measures to sustain this identity in the face of cisgenderist barriers and discrimination. Barrett and collaborator and Latham and Barrett also present a case study of a trans person who seems to experience gender confusion and retransition, yet they question whether dementia really leads to gender confusion. The case involves a person described as a trans woman with dementia living in a masculine identity due to familial pressure. Barrett and collaborator write, quote, conflict with family of origin, particularly children, was also an issue for trans people living with dementia. This was highlighted in the story of Edna, who was given an ultimatum by her son to present as male or she would never see her grandchildren again. While the service providers empathized, they were unsure how to challenge Edna's family and were concerned that doing so would jeopardize her access to her grandchildren. Edna's experience highlights how expressing gender can be infringed if transphobic family of origin intervenes. In these situations, it is important that changes to gender expression are not read as the loss of desire to maintain their gender, and for Edna, in her case, being a woman. So these authors are not alone in insisting that it is social, familial, and familial pressure that leads to a gender reversion or retransition, and that trans affirmative action would entail supporting the trans person in their historical, that is, the pre-dementia self-identified gender identity. In fact, most researchers, as well as LGBTQ groups and organizations and trans peoples in surveys about aging and dementia, adopt this approach. So it's the second paradigm is very popular. In addition to social and familial pressures, authors working within this paradigm state that the potential gender confusion could also be due to a medical condition. As such, any disidentification with the chosen gender identity does not represent the real identity of the person. According to this interpretation, gender identity is seen as stable through life, a component that is stable, that is undone by dementia, particularly in a cisgenderist environment that doesn't support the chosen identity. In other words, gender identity instability is interpreted as a symptom of dementia. While this second paradigm is trans affirmative, the fact that transness is privilege over cognitive disability has unintentionally some ableist and cogniticist consequences. For example, there is a presumption that people with dementia lack the capacity to express their needs and to advocate for themselves, as illustrated in this passage. Author says, Edna was reliant on service providers to advocate on her behalf. As a consequence of her dementia, Edna lost the capacity to educate staff about her needs and was more vulnerable to the transphobic demands of her family. She was dependent on others who did not sufficiently understand her transgender needs, and she was incapable of self-advocacy, end of quote. So we are concerned that this position invalidates the identities expressed by older people with cognitive disabilities. And this perception of dementia contradicts the current work in critical dementia studies that interrogates how self-determination, agency, and advocacy are often viewed and acted upon through an ableist and cogniticist lens.
So while this second paradigm is based on the idea that self-identified gender remains stable in trans people with dementia, what we name the trans-affirmative fluid approach, our third paradigm, favors gender flexibility. This approach focuses on the present moment, aiming to accompany the trans person with dementia in their daily or weekly moods, preferences, and needs. For example, Hunter, Bishop, and Westwood affirm that being supportive of a trans person with dementia involves accepting their new self-identification at the time they claim it. These authors even suggest that the disinhibition often associated with dementia can possibly encourage gender exploration with less guilt and shame. In other words, instead of interpreting potential gender ambivalence as a symptom of a disease, it could be reconceptualized as a form of gender agency and dementia as a facilitator of this agency. A trans-affirmative fluid approach respects trans, binary, and non-binary people in their self-identified gender identity, all while recognizing the self-determination of people living with dementia. However, this third paradigm does not, in our opinion, go far enough in its engagement with disability theory. So we would like to see a robust anti-ableist, anti-cogniticist, and anti-ageist perspective that takes into consideration the ableism, cogniticism, and ageism involved in living at the nexus of transness, old age, and cognitive disability. So building on this third paradigm, we advocate for a trans-affirmative fluid approach that supports the potentially changing nature of the trans person with dementia's gender identity and expression. We advocate that from a trans-affirmative perspective, we should refrain from imposing a gender identity on someone, even if that identity was historically strongly claimed and embodied. Inspired by an author named Lynn Sandberg, we argue that the notion of personhood for people with dementia should not be predicated on the biographical continuity of gender. Practically speaking, there are numerous interventions that could support a person's self-determined gender, such as providing a diversity of pins and badges that the person could wear each day to indicate the pronouns they prefer, or having masculine, feminine, and neutral clothing items in the closet for the person to decide. Areas that are a bit more difficult to manage include decisions about hormone replacement therapy, because the frequent stopping and starting of hormones is not recommended. There are a few other main principles that we also feel are fundamental to a trans-affirmative fluid approach. We believe that all forms of cognitive difference should be supported and validated. We advocate for a vision of the self that is multifaceted and changeable and not normatively rational. We also assert that any intervention with trans people with dementia also has to be anti-ageist. We believe that all older people should be given the right to gender self-determination, just like younger trans people. So this presentation has offered a first typology of the intervention strategies with trans people with dementia, as well as thoughts regarding a new paradigm that mobilizes an intersectional analysis of cisgenderism, ableism, cognitivism, and ageism. We think that practitioners would benefit from having a better understanding of the assumptions that underlie possible intervention strategies with this population. Yet we also see the need for more information that comes directly from trans older adults themselves and those who support them. And this is why we have undertaken our own project to learn about the lived experiences of this population. Alexandre and I have received a grant from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada in order to conduct interviews with trans older adults and their carers. And the research question that is guiding our project asks, what are the lived experiences of trans older adults living with dementia and their support networks?
So here are the two recruitment posters. One is for trans people living with dementia, the other for their carers. It's important to mention that our research project was approved by the Ethics Committee at the University of Ottawa. And we are proud to mention that for us, it's really centered on the voice of the first people concerned by those realities, and also that different measures have been put in place in order to adapt and transform the kind of research protocol in order to reach people experiencing disability and so on. So if you have any questions about that, please feel free to contact us. And so we are looking to recruit older adults who identify as trans and who have some form of dementia, whether mild or severe. Those people could be age over 50 and identify as trans, and it could be transsexual, transgender, non-binary, and so on. And we are also looking to recruit people of any age who are providing regular care and support to trans older adults with dementia. By regular, it's not necessarily every day, but it could be monthly. But anyway, so please feel free to contact us. We are aiming to recruit 10 trans people with dementia and 10 people who are supporting a trans person with dementia. It seems small number, but since it will be the first research at the international level focus only on trans people living with dementia, it will already be a huge step in the production of knowledge on that topic. And we had originally intended to travel anywhere in Canada to meet with potential participants, but unfortunately, due to the pandemic, we have had to change plans. So we will therefore conducting those interviews on Zoom instead. And we know that the recruitment will be a challenge, but we already have our two first participants, and we think that the majority of participants will come through word of mouth and personal contact. So if you know anyone who might fit the criteria and be interested in participating, please send them on our way. There are email address on those posters, but they can also, of course, reach us to our personal email address at the University of Ottawa. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much for the presentation. It was really amazing. As Alexandra said, we have some time for some questions. So if Bree or Karen or Amanda or myself, if we have any questions that we'd like to ask, it would be a wonderful time to take advantage of that. You can do that either audibly or through our chat as well. And I can pass that on.
We really wanted to make sure to leave enough time for questions, because often in typical conferences that we attend, there's never enough time. So we didn't want to monopolize the whole hour with just a talk. So we're really open to chatting about any angle of this topic that might interest you.
So I'll go first. My name's Bree. Hi, everyone. I'm coming from Aurora, Ontario, and I just saw the meetup group just this morning. So myself, I am also transgendered, trans woman. So I'm almost close to my 50s, pretty much. So, I think I don't know if I have dementia per se. I mean, I forget a lot of things, but you know, I'm kind of scared. I mean, everything that you guys have said about older adults with dementia is actually pretty scary. My support network is very minimal, and I don't know, the thought of living alone and older and stuff like that. I mean, my parents are still alive. They're out actually near Ottawa. But you know, I don't have a lot of family members out here. Gosh, I don't know what to say. I mean, I've done some trans activism. I've worked with the Correctional Services of Ontario a few years back in regards to trans placement in institutions. That was 2013 to 2015. And I've also done some trans help at Queen's University and just sort of speaking engagements to graduating physicians back in 2013. At work now, my job, there is a diversity I guess, community in regards to trans workers, basically peers. And I'm kind of hoping to dive into that. I was having a discussion with my manager yesterday. So yeah, that I don't really have any questions per se, because I haven't really researched a lot of the material yet. But it is quite interesting because it's actually a topic. I'm nowhere near any of you guys in regards to PhDs or anything like that. I'm a little member of the community, low on the totem pole, if you will. So, you know, I didn't finish school, a lot of it based on the trans issues that I faced, you know, growing up. And yeah, you know, so yeah, so it's quite interesting to see. As for the study, if there's any way that I can be of help, I mean, I'm the Toronto area per se, you know, there's not much up here in York region for trans anything really, if you will. It's very limited, and trying to get a hold of any trans groups up here is next to impossible. So on a good day. So yeah, so that's where I like to leave off with. I could put my information or contact somebody or whatever if there was any way that I can help out here, but I'll leave it to somebody else to the floor, and I'll just listen along. So yeah, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bree. I don't know if Marjorie want to add something, but I have a few thoughts. Thanks for everything you said, and I think you pointed out so many important issues like the isolation that a lot of trans people are experiencing due to discrimination, the fact that a lot of trans people don't find partner because of those cisgenderist and transphobic conceptualization, and due to cissexism and heterosexism, it's very often harder for trans women than it is for trans men because of the sexist society and transmisogynist society in which we live in, as Julia Serrano showed us in her famous book now. And I think that it shows the importance of building communities relationship, as you mentioned, even if it's hard, you know, to reach out and build a community and a community of support. But it's really important because when we will reach those older age and when we will be in need, we need to have people who advocate for us as trans people. And myself identifying as trans, and myself being middle-aged man now, I am asking myself all those questions. And in one of our paper, we discussed, Marjorie and I, and we took a concrete example where we were putting myself, you know, in 40 years from now, me, 80-year-old, and forgetting that I transitioned in my early 30s. And therefore, I forgot that I am a man. And we discussed the solution put forth by authors and organizations and trans organization in the what we call the second paradigm, the trans affirmative stable approach. And a lot of community organizations, LGBTQ community organizations, have put forward even a form in which trans people can fill in the pronouns they want, the name they want, etc., in order, if they, you know, forget their gender identity that they have historically chosen, well, people around them could implement that. And this kind of form and procedure has some advantages because all the wishes and preference are put forth very clearly in a legal document. Simultaneously, I was thinking about that document for myself, and I felt a little bit kind of tensions and complex contradictions about what would I like. And on one side, I feel like I would need and want those kind of documents because for me, I am a trans binary person. I identify only as masculine. And for me, it would be extremely violent to be identified as a woman and to be gender with female pronouns, etc. And even if I think, okay, it will be like I will be in a different stage of my life and I will be in a different ways of thinking. For me, thinking about that possibility in the future is just so unacceptable and so violent. I cannot accept that. Simultaneously, I'm like, well, maybe if I'm 80 and I have Alzheimer and I forgot that I transition and re-identify with my sex assigned at birth, it would be extremely violent at that moment to impose a trans masculine identity to me in order to respect what I have decided for myself 30 years ago, but that doesn't represent the current reality. So I'm really torn, and it's interesting because in my current situation, I wrote my will and living will and anticipated directive, and I decided to not express any preferences because I have not yet determined what would be the best route to respect myself. So it raises very interesting and complicated questions. But I will stop here. Maybe Marjorie has something to add, and Bree maybe something to add as well.
Yeah, just quickly, sorry, Brie, we'll let you speak again in just a moment. I just wanted to thank you as well for sharing some of your thoughts and also your fears. And I think those fears are really very real. And in all the literature we've read, that's, I think, the thing that people express the most in terms of trans aging is these fears around dementia and memory loss. And even though we're pursuing this work in an academic way, in an academic context, like Alexandre said, these questions are very real for us and very personal. And so I think it's interesting to just connect it, as you did, Brie, to real life concerns, because this is people's reality. Yeah, Brie, go ahead. We're listening.
No worries. So thank you. I'm trying to lower my hand here. Yeah, and the thing though too is I have a slightly younger brother, and he's married with a few kids. The relationship is no more, mostly something that his wife had done many years ago, in regards to transphobic perceptions, basically, that really made the relationship between my brother and her and the kids and everything just obsolete, basically. And I mean, I don't lose any sleep over that one. I still get on with life. I have a younger sister, biologically, cisgender sister, basically, and we have difficulty at best of times to communicate. We don't argue, but there's that transphobic, sort of mentality. Then, I mean, we come from small town Ontario in, Belleville, basically, not far from Kingston. And, so, the minimal, and then I mean very minimal discussions between her and I about my transgendered lifestyle or decision making and stuff. I mean, I had my surgery just last September, so we're just talking in Montreal, mind you, just like just over a year ago, and my sister's like, oh my gosh, why, so, but also the fact that going on the perception of dementia and older trans individuals is that I don't have kids. So, I don't have anybody. When my parents pass on, I guess you could say my parents are my best allies, if you will. Like, they are, my mom, back in 2014, after some issues, actually relating to my sister-in-law, but I ended up in the correctional system because of, being, how do you say it? And I'll put it out there. It's not a big deal to me, but the perception that transgender individuals are pedophiles or child molesters, and that's where that came about. So I ended up spending a year in custody trying to fight the allegations. Of course, they were, from my sister-in-law, because that was her way of trying to get back at me, and try to keep me away from the kids, based on her fears of, oh, well, Bree will, or any other transgender person, of course, it's the redneck mentality, if you will, for lack of a better term, but, turn my kids into gay or whatever the case may be. And so in that part of it, that's how I became closely engaged with the Correctional Services Ontario, and was the first pre-op at the time transgendered individual would be put with women, myself, be put with women in a correctional setting in Ontario. I believe across Canada, I'm not quite sure. So in the provincial system, mind you. So I was the very first individual. I had to go through Ontario Human Rights Commission and won that big case. So things turned around, and and then of course my sister-in-law tried again. I was back in for another 6 months and fought those charges all on my own, and won that one as well. So unrelated to the first time, but it changed a lot. I mean, there was that fear of what transgender people are all about, that they're you know, they're part of the lower society, if you will, from people who have that, you know, cisgender redneck mentality, if you will. And I'm saying these terms because you know, medically terms or other terms I can't think of at the top. So pardon me. So, you know, and then it becomes fear. I mean, my work is mostly, you know, and I just started there not too long ago because of the pandemic, losing my other job, is mostly a construction worker type atmosphere, and you know, contractors and building contractors. That's basically it. So, you know, just the fear alone of you know, having, and I work with a few guys. I'm the only woman in my department, and I can say that one individual, you know, who I don't think knows that I'm trans yet. It's very fearful of, you know, his mentality, working with him, because I can see him, he's questioning, you know, questioning sort of that. So it's when you talk, Alexandra, about the violence and stuff, and we just got so Richard is like a brother to me. I live with him. I've been with these guys for the last 2 years, sharing a house, and you know, his youngest daughter is just turned 15, and her and I are, you know, just like this, and love the girl. She's in my world, you know. And the oldest boy is 17. We have a 18-year-old going on 19-year-old guy from the foster system here. So it's a dynamic house, but very inclusive house. We have, you know, literally 4 teenagers, 3 teenagers at the best of day. So with her, the 15-year-old, you know, that's the only one right now when I get older that, you know, if she's still in my life, and I hope so, you know, and vice versa, is the only one that I can think of that's going to be probably around to help me. You know, but we just had a roommate we got rid of. So it's the dad's best friend from way back that helped raise the kids. And this just happened less than 2 months ago, where it was violence. You know, it was like out verbal violence at most, which was luckily, but you know, the transphobic mentality. And you know, so she had to go. But you know, that was kind of not scary in the way of the physical sense, but it was, you know, oh my gosh, like, how dare you? Pretty scary to see how the mentality, you know, the transphobic mentality is. And I think that's probably the worst I've ever come across verbally from anybody in life, you know. So I can only imagine some of the PSWs when you're aging, you know, of the stuff that I hear just in general terms of long-term care homes, you know. So yeah, it's I don't want to take everybody's time, but you know, so this is a really good topic. I had no idea, and I thank you guys very much, because it's something that I think of, but I don't discuss with anybody, you know, and haven't really discussed anything like that with my mom or anybody, you know, as to what will happen in the future. So of course I don't have kids, so I can't discuss it with them, discuss with, you know, my plans for her in the future, if you will. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Bree. You pointed out so many important things here, but I will just bounce back on 2 or 3 things. But the high rates of violence, the high rates of incarceration, also the Transpose survey in Canada, and also the big quantitative survey in the US pointed out to that reality. And even the question we brought up for you today about, you know, a potential gender confusion or disidentification brought by dementia, and kind of more gender fluidity that could be the reality of some trans older adults in the incarceration system, in the prison industrial complex, is not taken into account, is not taken into consideration. So it's great that we are thinking more and more of being inclusive of the self-identification gender in prisons. But of course, the point would be to abolish the prison and to etc. And also to make those space less gender space and more acceptable and inclusive for also non-binary people, because it's a reality that will pop up really soon in the prison and incarceration studies and research.
I think there's a question from Karen.
Sorry, I'll try turning my video on and hopefully I'll stay. Yeah, I just also thank you for this topic. I actually had read your paper a little while ago, so I was excited to hear you speak about it and your work. So I identify as cisgender. I'm a registered nurse, and I actually worked in long-term care with people living with dementia for about 15 years in a nursing home, and I also am the parent of a wonderful trans woman who is now 25, who came out about 10 years ago. And now I work actually very casually, but with Rainbow Health Ontario, doing education around trans health. So I'm involved in a bunch of different things, trying to do my best to be an ally and to advocate. And one of the things is with the Ottawa Hospital. I lived in Alma, just outside of Ottawa, and we have worked together to improve how they do their intake when a patient comes in to be registered, and to take pronouns, to take gender identity information, and ensure that it will be visible and hopefully followed by the staff. And one of the things that has been raised by the staff is they're very hesitant to ask older adults. They're totally okay with asking the younger folk, and probably even, you know, into your ages, Alexandra and Brie, but they don't want to ask older folk those questions. And I've been trying to send them information and why it matters. And Brie, you have so eloquently described, you know, and you as well, Alexandre, but how important it is. But that is a big misconception that it's all about the young folk. And I guess, so I'm just sort of throwing that out there for your thoughts. And the other thing is, at first, when I was listening, when I had the privilege of doing a master's degree in nursing, and I because of my work at the time, I focused on, my project title was Preserving Personhood for People Living with Dementia in Long-Term Care. This was before my daughter came out. At that time, I didn't know anything about what it was to be transgender. I didn't even think about the fact that I was cisgender. And so unfortunately, I never explored that aspect of that. But what I came up with was kind of a, well, it's not what I came up with, what the literature led me to, was doing a bit of a life history, and having a poster with pictures and life history board on, you know, as part of your introduction to this individual on the wall of their room or whatever. But now, as I listen to you, Brie, and I ponder it, I realize there again goes my privilege, because it's like, that's an assumption that there are going to be people who will tell the right story, and provide the correct information for that storyboard. So I was, at first I was thinking, well, we could tell the story of this person, and so then they could have that fluidity, but that's not necessarily going to work for everyone. So I don't know, but anyways, sorry, I really rambled on, but just some thoughts.
Those are really great thoughts, Karen. Thank you so much. And actually, it's interesting you mentioned personhood, because our most recent article that just came out 2 months ago is on personhood and dementia, and using some trans conceptual tools to try to rethink personhood. Feel free to contact us and we can send you that article if you don't have it. And I think it's really interesting what you're saying about the hospital staff not wanting to go there with older adults and ask their pronouns and identification. I think that really stems from a lot of ageism. Well, the intersection of ageism and cisgenderism there, that just assumes that no older adults could be trans. And there's so much gatekeeping around gender identity and sexual orientation in regards to older adults. And I guess Alexandre could speak more to this, but also within trans circles and trans studies and trans communities, there is a much greater emphasis on youth as compared to older adults. So that's, yeah, so we're trying in our work to debunk some of these myths and to turn the lens to the experiences of trans older adults.
And actually, forgive me for jumping back in, but it'd be really brief. One of the first things I went to try to start learning and to support my daughter, so about 10 years ago, this gentleman, well, I don't know what pronouns to use, but this person is perhaps dead now, because at the time it was a small circle of people. We all were sharing our own experiences, and this person who I was sitting beside said he was a gay man. And then we went through sort of a teaching was presented to us, and by the end there was kind of a go around the room again, and he said, you know what, I think maybe I'm a trans woman, and I never had the language before to describe myself. And so when I think about your work, you know, someone could discover their identity very late in life. He was 84 years old. I don't know if she ever got to live her, you know, her identity or not. I never saw her again, but yeah, sorry.
No, thank you so much, Karen. And it's so interesting. If you want to go see a beautiful website, and they produce a book, it's quite expensive because it's a book in color. And I will share the screen again just to show you all the picture we presented were from this book. And I will just go back to the first slide and here. So this is this book. And if you go on the website, it's called To Survive on This Shore. There are tons of photographs and interviews of transgender and gender non-conforming and non-binary older adults. And it's all older adults, and some of them are sharing those stories about, I grew up in a period where the term transsexual, transgender didn't even exist. Like people born in the 1920s, and at that time it was not even on their radar, and they spent most of their life thinking it was not possible. And they are today 80s, 90s, in their 90s, and think, oh my gosh, that was it. I was trans, but I never had the vocabulary, never had the tools. And it's really great to discover those stories through those testimonials and their photos and pictures. It's a very beautiful project, and it's good because one of them is saying, I don't know if you remember the quote, Marjorie, but the person said, in the 60s, I was I don't know, like a transvestite. In the 70s, I was a transgender. In the 80s, I was a transsexual. In the 90s, I was, and so she is talking about all the kind of identities and label that she had access through the different decades. And I think she ended up by saying, today, I'm just the woman I am, or something like this. And it was like very beautiful. So. Yeah. Anyway, I strongly encourage you to go consult that. And as Marjorie said, feel free to reach out to us. We will send you the PDF of the last article, because this idea of personhood, the main thesis we defend in that article, the main argument we defend is that while there is great and invaluable aspect to that work in critical dementia studies on personhood and all the value we put on biographical continuity, this notion is based fundamentally on a form of cisnormativity. That is the idea that a person should not change, that should stay the same, and stay the same in all the components of their life. And it applies as well to gender identity. So if the person changed their gender identification and became trans, well, they should keep that gender identity all along their lives. And so we kind of use, as Marjorie said, those tools like cisnormativity and other concepts from trans studies and really apply it in the field of dementia studies in order to rethink notions like personhood that are at the core of critical dementia studies. So yes, thank you for your comments.
I'm just going to jump in to mention that unfortunately, I need to log off now because I need to attend a meeting. However, Alex can stay on for another few minutes if people have some final questions. And if you want, he could put our email addresses in the chat and make sure you know how to contact us. But I just want to thank all of you for this lovely discussion. And again, Amanda and Glenn, thank you so much for inviting us. So
My pleasure.
I will leave the meeting, but Alex will stay. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Marjorie.
Marjorie.
Thanks.
I see Bree has her hand up. I just wanted to ask a quick question if I could, just because, I mean, I'm part of the Ottawa Senior Pride Network, and part of the work that we do is advocacy work. We train, and we're also interested in long-term care. And so I'm interested about how we can, as an organization, can assist and be allies for trans people in these various positions, and how we can actually go to, when we do speaks and conversations, how do we, make sure that we're including trans issues within generally our training and education to support workers.
Well, I think that providing some workshops like those ones today, it's a great initiative. Continue reading and getting informed, and on top of the new information, it's a very growing, fast evolving field, trans studies. So even me, like right now, trying to keep up with everything that is done regarding non-binary people, it's already a challenge. And I'm in the field of trans studies, but I can see how it emerges quickly, the fact that non-binary community is growing, I would say, almost faster than the trans community, and how there are some issues that are linked, but how some other issues are completely different. So keep reading, and as well, really ask for the input of trans people. As trans and non-binary people, we have tons of expertise and experiential knowledge that is as worthy as the knowledge that is disseminated in scientific publications and by people with PhD. So I'm not saying that to invalidate people with PhD. I'm one of them, but there is one part of the knowledge that comes from PhD and education, but there's also experiential knowledge that is so important. After that, well, there are tons of little tricks, but we can continue. I don't want to take too much time, and I want to allow Bree to ask one last question, maybe.
Oh, so I was just going to mention regardless of the age, I remember many years ago, before I even had my identification changed over, which was in November this year, this month, 2014. And how it was to go, when I was living downtown Toronto, to go into a healthcare, and my ID was still in my, birth name and gender. And here you are dressed as female, and this happened many times, and then they come out yelling, your name to come into the doctor's office in your original name, and here you are, and you're just kind of like, raising your hand kind of like this with other people around. Scary, very scary, and it's only been, of course, after the ID change, which was also after starting to live this way, live in my preferred gender, and my ID still in the opposite, it was very difficult. So after that was all done, it was kind of downhill from there. A few little bumps more on the visual part, and people would hear my voice or see me, and now not so much. I think it's the feminization, but I mean, no matter what, like we're on medication for the rest of our lives, and God only knows in the long-term care homes and stuff like that what could happen. And Alexandra, going back to your birth life, if you will, or gender, is and thinking about how that is, like, just that concept that you bring up, it just overwhelmingly scary. Yeah, thank you. Amanda, go ahead. I guess Amanda or someone. Yeah.
Thank you, Bree, and thank you for sharing so much of your personal stories and experiences. I really appreciate that. So it's not easy to do, and you've been through a lot. I'm so sorry to hear about some of the experiences you've been through. You're so brave for telling them. Thank you, Alexandre and Marjorie, who's gone, for coming and doing the presentation today. It's really useful for me in my work. And I'd love to get your latest article and to see kind of how the rest of this particular project goes that you're advertising for today. I did want to ask, I know on the poster it says particularly that the interviews will be done over video conferencing. I'm wondering if this could also be done over the phone?
Totally. It could be done over the phone if for any reasons it's not suitable on Zoom or video conference with the people we want to interview. So we are open to that possibility. It would only require a slight change to the ethics certification. We can do that very quickly and interview the person. And if the pandemic allows us, if the situation related to the pandemic allows us, maybe we could also go back. Originally, we got the permission from the ethics certification board to do in-person interviews. So if we see that the situation allows us again to do some in-person interviews, we will be open to that for sure. Again, we would do slightly a little change to our ethics certification, but we are very open to do any kind of, I don't like this term working in the field of disability studies, but we will do any kind of accommodation that is needed for the people with different disabilities or realities in order to make those interviews easier. The interviews with the trans people living with dementia aims to be shorter, and we have 2 interviews with those people compared to 1 longer interview with their carers. So because for carers, it will be easier to do 1 interview in 1 hour-ish, but for trans people living with dementia, it might be more tiring to do 1 long interview. So we will do 2 shorter interviews with a few days in between. So, yeah, we can adapt for sure. And to bounce back on the last comment of Bree, thanks for mentioning that, the importance of ID. I think we cannot put enough emphasis on all those rights that have been gained in Canada quite recently. The last province to change their requirement regarding changing the ID gender markers was back in 2019 or 2020, I think. So a year and a half, 2 years ago. And back in 2016 only, it changed in Quebec, where I am from and based. I live in Gatineau, and I've been coming from Montreal, and I've been forcibly sterilized by the government of Quebec and Canada in order to get my ID, because until 2016 in Quebec, the requirement to change your ID was to change your genitals based on the state requirements. And it was like this in all provinces in Canada for all trans people until 2012 in Ontario, and Ontario was the first province to change that requirement. And so it's very interesting because that requirement was forcing trans people to get sterilized in order to get identification paper with their self-chosen gender. And this is completely unacceptable. Even before that, the Supreme Court of Canada had determined that for people with cognitive or intellectual disabilities, it was a violation of their fundamental right to forcibly sterilize them. But paradoxically, it was a requirement for trans people in Canada to get sterilized and change their gender, their genitalia in order to get their ID. So it's a total kind of double standard. And it's something that at some point, I think trans communities in Canada should get a collective lawsuit against the Canadian government and the provincial government in order to get compensated in some ways, even if it's symbolic, in order to show to the population and to the government and to the medical system that sterilizing trans people in order to get them their ID is totally unacceptable. And it has been done until 2019 in Canada. So, yeah.
Okay, well, I'm looking at the time. It's about 10 minutes past. I don't want to take up all of your time, Alexandra. So I thought I would wrap it up unless anyone has any quick last thoughts. But again, I just wanted to thank you, Alexandra, and also, of course, Marjorie, who left us a little bit earlier. For those who maybe didn't notice, in the chat, I did put up the email for the research study, and it's trans.dementia.project@gmail.com. So you can reach out to Alexandra and Marjorie if you are interested in doing so further. So thank you again for a wonderful, so informative and eye-opening, and on a topic that, you know, clearly is emerging and you know, of real concern for so many people. So as you said, it's the academic side of what you're doing, but the real you know, personal issues that are that it's affecting, that's so important. So thank you again.
Thank you again. And I added in the chat box as well my personal email address. So it's abaril@uottawa.ca. And you can also feel free, and the people who will watch the recording on the web could reach out to me and the participant as well today to receive our publications or get in touch with us for any questions.
Wonderful. Okay,
Thank
well,
you so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Bree and Karen for attending today and taking part in the discussion. It was really important to hear your perspectives, and I greatly appreciate it. So thanks so much, and I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, take care.
Take care.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.